You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 170 of Arsenal Pass. This week, Brennan, some changes, big changes, small changes, Zen changes, Bonds changes. I guess we'll find out, but LSS have swung the ban hammer in favor of some reduction to Zen's power level after a pretty impressive run in Nationals. Maybe not as, I guess, dominant as people had potentially expected or thought in the lead up to this, but Zen has definitely been doing some work, both in, kind of representation, top eights, and then definitely in wins, although we saw Nu take a lot of wins this past week at Nationals. But all things said and done, LSS have decided to make some changes, which we'll talk about, and then the impact that has on the upcoming class constructor meta as we head towards Pro Tour Amsterdam, a few weeks away now.
Yeah, it kind of feels like one of those things where the sentiment outweighs the actual statistics. I do think it is very powerful. Like, if you just looked at the raw numbers, it looks extremely powerful. But I feel like the sentiment that I was seeing on Twitter and the general discourse around Zen was, I would have expected the numbers to be higher at that case. And I did see some, like you and I were talking before we hopped on the pod, like the Canadian top 8 in particular did look a bit unhealthy. But in regards to some of the data that, Legendary Studios releasing, Zen was powerful, but it wasn't just like ridiculous. It wasn't like 90% or 80% or something like that. I mean, I would have expected more if I had just gone off of Twitter sentiment, I felt like.
I think as soon as you play that deck enough, you realize just how insanely broken it is, to be honest. So, I mean, there's definitely ways to combat and beat it. The problem is, I think, with Zen and its previous state, or its state that we saw through this national season, is that it just, you can't really interact with it, and it kind of just plays its own game. And yes, there are ways you can have favorable matchups into it for sure, but it's never consistent. And Zen can just sometimes, click the fingers and do the thing, and all of a sudden 51 damage is coming in. So it's kind of, I think something had to be done. It's, if I look at something like Starvo, right? Starvo was, more dominant in terms of wins. Not by much, though, actually, if you look back at it. But at least you could interact with Starvo, whereas
a little bit.
Zen, yeah, it's actually kind of similar in some ways, but I think at least you kind of died over the course of a bunch of consistent turns, as opposed to your opponent just dropping 50 on your face. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm more of a Starvo hater than you, but I really felt like you couldn't play the game sometimes, and also it was like, one kind of, as soon as that deck got rolling, kind of felt like one thing led into another. It's like, oh, I've been hit for 1 million damage, but I've also discarded these cards, and it's just like, it was kind of painful to get through these matches sometimes. I got to ask you though. So now, at this point in time, looking back on Part the Mistviel, do you still prefer that? And when I say prefer that power level of design, I do mean the first iteration of Zen. Do you prefer that power level of design over some of the previous sets, or do you think we need to sort of tone it back and meet a little bit more in the middle moving forward?
No, I like this kind of power level. I like banning. I think bannings are actually good for games, to be honest. I think it's better to push the envelope a little bit and bring it back a bit if needed, especially because I think LSS have learned a lot about how to be strategic in terms of how they use the ban and suspended list, ban restricted list. I think it's quite interesting to choose, two colors of a card here and effectively make it majestic, something that I thought they might have done with Plunderon back in the day, for instance, and ultimately they never did. But it's cool that they can, have the kind of capacity to be able to make decisions like this and make them pretty quickly and make them quite dynamic. So I think that's good for the game. And I think if the power level is higher, I think that overall is more enjoyable, honestly. I think this format, as much as I think Zen was a problem and I didn't particularly like combating Zen, and honestly, sometimes it felt like you'd play games where you're like, okay, let's say I'm playing something like Azalea, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, game's going well. I'm drawing my disruption. I'm like hitting them with a red ledger here, gone down to 17. I draw up my hand. Ooh, I only have a drill shot in this hand. This is going to be a little bit tough, but it's only one turn. It's only one turn I've missed out on my disruption here. Come into my drill shot. They go, block with the traverse, block with the boots. And then they're like, oh, you missed? Well, I have my turn. Here's 50 damage, Art of War, Harmony, and Harmony, all this stuff. It's just like, Cool game, man. Cool game. Glad we played that. So I think, being able to nerf a specific power of the deck without necessarily completely derailing the hero and taking away from what the hero is. Like, I think there was a lot of calls, for things like Art of War to be banned, for Harmony to be banned, for, them to completely ban Bonds, for instance, which I think if they would have done Bonds entirely, it would have completely just derailed maybe what Zen can do. Whereas I think this is going to be interesting. I think, the discussion I guess we're going to have is Zen still best deck in the format, or is something else maybe taking the crown heading towards Pro Tour Amsterdam?
So what about your week in Flesh and Blood? I'm seeing an interesting note here. You said it says have a bit of a fab bug. It sounds like you got 2 bugs with that cough. But
I did. Yeah, I got a severe flu. I was knocked out for most of last week. I had to take a couple of days off work and try and recover, and I'm still got this really bad lingering. Yeah, body aches, fever, really sore throat, things like that. But then
sore throat. That's not the word we use. That's not the word we use.
Well, poppy. But to finish off the week, really, it's just been, and I guess this week as well, it's just been like this annoying cough that won't go away, and really tightness of breath, which is making exercise quite difficult. And I have this competition coming up in a couple of weeks, which isn't ideal. So, but yeah, no, I have been playing a bit of Flesh and Blood. I was thinking, right, there's a Battle Hardened in a few weeks, and I was like, do I want to go and play on this Battle Hardened? I've never gone out of my way to play a Battle Hardened before, but I was thinking off the back of Nationals, I'm enjoying playing some Flesh and Blood. I've got this I want to brew some decks. I want to play something fun. And last week, I've been playing around with some Teklevossen and Riptide. I actually think Riptide is really good, to be honest, right now. But the kind of changes to Zen and the potential shift in the meta maybe change that. I actually think Riptide, if nothing changed, Riptide could have been an interesting proposition for Pro Tour Amsterdam. I'm not heading to Amsterdam. I won't be at this Pro Tour, but I think people heading to Amsterdam could have been looking at Riptide, and depending on what the meta kind of shakes out, like with Zen getting a little bit kind of nerfed, I think maybe even helpful for Riptide. I think Riptide's pretty good, honestly. It's a pretty interesting hero.
What do you think people are missing during the national season in regards to Riptide? Like, how is it dawning on you now?
I think a wider meta is really tough for Riptide because you can have a lot of terrible matchups. So I think you need quite a narrow meta, which is always more of what a Pro Tour is than something like a Nationals, or it kind of scales down, right? The more Premier level, I think the narrower the meta tends to be, as opposed to you cascade down through into open events like Callings, ProQuest, etc. Those become more and more open, I think, depending on your regional meta, but usually those become more and more open. So they can be a tougher prospect. I think if you go to a Nationals, our Nationals like 130 players. If you went to a Nationals above 100 players, you're not going to see often. Zen will probably be 20 to 25%. In some cases, if you're in Japan, it'll be 30%. But after that, the next most played deck is often going to be around like 10 to 15%, and it's going to drop off rapidly. And you're going to see a very wide meta, I think. So I think it was hard to pick up some of that Riptide for that, honestly. But I think there is a way. I was looking at Riptide as like just targeting purely new and Zen, and actually I think being pretty good. But outside of that, I mean, you're probably scooping it up to Kano and Prism and things like that, and those are still very good decks. So yeah, I think that's kind of the issue with Riptide, is that it can have some really good matchups, I think, and it has a really powerful hero ability. But at the same time, the narrowness of kind of what your game plans need to be, you can have some pretty terrible matchups, I think.
All right, and you recently threw up a Dash deck tech on the channel.
Yeah, go check it out. It's up there. It's the Nationals top 4 and Nationals winning deck for Australia and New Zealand, respectively. I also saw I think the deck took another Nationals over the weekend. I don't know if the list is exactly the same. I saw in the Netherlands, I was watching the coverage, the deck looked really similar. And I know Sander, who's a calling champion actually as well, taking that down, is a very, very good player. I don't know if Sander, if you watch this, Sander, let me know. If you played the same list, you play something slightly different. But yeah, I think it's a cool deck. It's a fun deck. It's fun. And I think it maybe gets better with this Zen change, with a few tweaks and changes, which I talk about in the video as well.
Yeah, for sure. You good over there?
I'm alive.
Yeah.
I'm alive. I promise. All right. Should we talk news? Should we talk ban and restricted announcements, Brendan?
Let's do it.
Let's quickly talk, and then I want to hear your first impressions on these. I know I kind of alluded to my kind of thoughts at the top of the show, but Classic Constructed, Bonds of Ancestry Yellow and Bonds of Ancestry Blue are banned. And if you want to go and check out this massive kind of dissertation by Brian Gottlieb on the decision behind this. I think it's great that we get this. We get this kind of real reasoning around why they've done this. I think he lays out some really good cases as to kind of what they missed potentially, and then also why they went for this specific ban. So I recommend go check it out. But I think specifically they just talk about the consistency of that big damage turn, and 9 bonds being the way to consistently do big turns. Even if your turns aren't as consistent from a damage standpoint, you are more likely going to be able to do these big turns in any given game. So they're pretty massive. Living Legend, Channel Lake Frigid is unrestricted. I think, I don't have much to say about this. They point out in the pod that the restrictions targeting Bravo have kind of done the trick, and it's not a viable option, but not a dominant one. And then also Channel Lake Frigid had impacts on other Living Legend heroes, so they've made that change. And then in Blitz, they have Crown of Seeds is banned, which I think was already done, right? Yep, you can go and see that from the previous schedule of bans restricted announcement. Aether Wildfire is banned, and Aether Flare is banned, which Brendan is cheering about.
Well, they gave a little olive branch. There's an olive branch here too.
They did.
Yeah, so
because of AMP.
Yeah, so there's a new weapon, Volzar, the Lightning Rod. This is a lightning wizard weapon staff, 2-handed. It's a token. It says, if you control an aura permanent with sigil in its name, this costs 1 less resource. To activate, it says once per turn instance, 1 resource, amp X, where X is the number of lightning cards you've played this turn.
Dude, that looks like it's got combo written all over it.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, so, this stuff gets... This stuff gets banned in Blitz, but I wonder about Class Constructed, because, this seems particularly powerful with those cards in Class Constructed. Like, I understand Blitz. Blitz is not, obviously, the life totals of the Blitz format are just not very congruent with where I believe Wizard's design is. And it's always a fine line. But nevertheless, this interaction seems like it would still be extremely powerful in Class Constructed.
Well, you just have to look at how impactful even a card like Kindle has been, right? Kindle, which gives amp 1, and just the power that can add already to Aether Wildfire. Imagine if you're like, hey, I'm going to Aether Wildfire you for 11.
Yeah, it sounds like something they don't want to happen, by the way. So I'm wondering what's in our future. Do you think that we're going to see potential Aether Wildfire, Aether Flare bans in Class Constructed, or do you think... surely they designed around it. Maybe. I could see Wildfire going. I do remember Brian specifically asked me a question at Barcelona Worlds where he was like, how would you feel about a wizard that wasn't balanced around Aether Wildfire? That wasn't the only thing they could do, reasonably.
That's cool, right?
Yeah, for sure. I was like, that'd be great. I just, I talked to him about it later and he was like, nah, I didn't say that. No, I was like, okay. So
I think the main thing is that, this Lightning Wizard isn't going to have Canon's ability. And that's some of the ridiculous nature of Wizard is when you can do all this instant speed stuff. And maybe, this, for instance, Icelander couldn't pop off in the same way with Wildfire, right? So,
what I like doing in Flesh and Blood is playing or utilizing more than 4 cards a turn. I love doing that. So when this says, X is equal to the number of lightning cards you play this turn, it just brings me back to the times that, I've opted 9 cards of my deck, or I have 13 cards in my pitch zone, I have potions on the battlefield. Like, I love doing that stuff, and this seems like it's right up that alley.
Potentially, yeah. What's the non-Kano deck you gravitate towards most right now in Class Constructed?
Depends what kind of tournament. Pro Tour?
Nah. It's Battle Hardened. We're going to Battle Hardened.
It depends. Like, I don't want the answer to be too complicated, but let's say that timing and testing was limited. Probably Victor. I think Victor. I like Victor. I know it seems so antithetical to the Kano play style, but there's something cathartic about the Oldhim-esque loop.
Have you played much Prism? See, I feel like Prism would be...
I've not played much Prism. I've heard good things about it, but if I had minimal time to test, if there's one thing I've heard about Prism that is overwhelmingly that people say is that it is hard to play and that it's extremely punishing. So, it just
that's true.
It really does depend on the tournament. If it's like an armory, you get to pick up a deck that's already pre-built for you. Yeah, I probably wouldn't be picking up Victor there. I'll tell you that. But
what do you think of the ban restricted announcements?
I like the idea of reducing the consistency of something like that, and not also at the same time not neutering the hero. Like, I think that, like you mentioned, that's why I wanted to ask you the question about part the Mistviel design versus some of the earlier sets and where you think we should go moving forward. Because I do think that the Zen design was intentional. And maybe not to this level of dominance, but I think they wanted the hero to be powerful. I think that the interaction with these cards was straightforward. So just toning back some of the consistency of the deck, it just seems like par for the course with their design philosophy. And every conversation we've had with Brian on this podcast has been pretty much right up that alley. Where they want to keep the ceilings there, but maybe decrease some of those floors.
Yeah, I think the challenge was that you talked about variance versus consistency, and I think just this ability to pop off these big turns was just too consistent. I mean, Zen is still strong, but yeah, I think they give a good reasoning to it.
How strong?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah, that's the question.
I can't tell you. I don't know. It's a big hit. Like it is. I mean, I think there's a couple of questions that kind of pop up from this. Is like the first one is what next for Zen in terms of does it just look like the same deck but missing 3 to 6 cards, or does it start to look a little bit different and you explore different combo avenues to potentially leverage and utilize? It's just that this combo in particular was so powerful, so versatile, and allowed you to play into a lot of different game plans because of what bonds could go and find you potentially out of your graveyard. So aside from more bonds, but it can't now find more bonds. So
it's a very interesting question. I mean, I kind of want you to answer said question of like, do you think it's the same deck with -6 cards, -6 of some of its best cards, which I think is the least interesting potential outcome of this? Or do you think that people can explore different ways of building Zen? And would said different ways of building Zen be competitive?
Let's save it for the main topic. Let's say that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Leave me on the
I think we can dive into a lot of things.
On the edge of my seat, tip of my seat, as they say.
Any other thoughts on? I mean, I haven't played any Living Legend, so I can't really comment on Channel Lake Frigid being unrestricted. Seems probably fine. I think if anything, Stavo was a lot worse. They did ban like 45 cards. To be fair.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say about Living Legends is that I hope that it becomes like a Pro Tour or World Championship format at some time. I think that the class constructed format is probably not going anywhere. It will like always be a mainstay, but I think it could be cool to swap out Limited at one of these Pro Tours or World Champs for a Living Legend format. Like I would like there to be more integrity and sort of like more of a reason to play Living Legend, because I actually think it's a pretty cool format, and especially for people that started the early days of Flesh and Blood and grew up with some of those really powerful decks that have since rotated. It's very nostalgic to go back and be able to play some of those. So I would love more opportunities to play Living Legend, and I think they're doing that, right? I think they said that there's going to be some callings, or was it just like battle
skirmish?
Skirmish.
Yeah, next season of skirmish is going to be Living Legend. Yeah.
So that's reasonable. But the PT level would be sick. I think that the format itself has a lot of potential.
Yeah, it's just hard to balance so many formats. I think start with the calling would be my... I think I've said this before, but a ProQuest season I think would be a cool way to start. Because you can...
That's a lot of data as well.
It is, yeah. So you get a lot of data over multiple weeks, so you can then develop from there, I think. And also, because it's regional based, you kind of... I think there's a little bit less feels bad if you try and do something at a much higher level immediately. Like imagine if you do a calling or a PT even, and particular groups come super prepared with testing and completely break the format in a way that you haven't been able to test or something yet.
I mean, it's just that sounds fucking awesome.
It could be a disaster.
That sounds like
I think a safer way is to say, hey, look, I'm down for it.
You're saying all the right things.
Not for LSS, we're not.
Yeah.
And then, Blitz we just talked about. I mean, like we talked about.
That format really doesn't exist right now. I mean, tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah. No.
I'm sure there are some casual pockets, but even casually, I don't know a single human being who plays Blitz. Do you?
Yeah, I definitely know some people, but
yeah.
It's There's a few communities I know that play exclusively Blitz.
Are these communities that you're familiar with online or locally?
No, locally.
Okay,
one of the stores out North Sydney, I know they play basically just Blitz exclusively, but yeah, it's pretty minimal, I would say. I think Living Legend is more interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I still maintain that I actually enjoy Blitz as a format, and I think that like it's a high integrity format. Not incredibly high. Maybe it shouldn't be at the Pro Tour, but if it was at the Pro Tour, you would not hear me complaining. Like, I think that it's a totally reasonable format, even if there is less skill expression and there's more non-games. I think that's totally fine. I think it's a super accessible way to play Flesh and Blood. Like, you still get all of the uniqueness with all the different heroes like you would in Class Constructed. And yeah, I think the gameplay is still there. It's a bit degenerate sometimes, but yeah, I mean, it's not going to deter me. A little bit of degeneracy.
I mean, I'll put you on my seat. You can play the 3 win-ins I had at Worlds and Blitz, and you can tell me if you still want to play that format. That's actually, by the way, I think it's the last game of Blitz I've played was that Rhino game on camera.
The last game of Blitz I played were helping you prepare for that tournament before you absolutely threw all my advice in the trash can and swapped out your Prism cards the night before.
I don't remember you saying that.
Bro, I was the one.
Oh. All right. I want to give just a last shout out to someone that I know, Xavier, who's actually from New Zealand, but just won Japanese Nationals over the weekend. So congrats to Xavier. Got to spend a little bit of time with Xavier, catch up quickly at Tokyo. He was doing some translating for me at one of the vendors. So thanks, Xavier. But he just won Japanese Nationals. So some bigger Nationals over the weekend to close it out, actually. There was Nationals in the Netherlands. There was Singapore, Hong Kong. So yeah, quite a big.
I know Sweden.
Xing won Hong Kong.
Do you see the one where they had the big esports studio?
Oh yeah, I did. Sorry, I think you're right. I think that is Sweden. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Yeah, shout out to Xing as well, who been on a bit of a tear these last 12 months. Won nationals or regionals in Hong Kong. So
nice. On to the Command and Cookout.
Go for it. You're gonna have to read this one.
First one is from this one's from Lachlan. From Sydney, Australia. By the way, if you get your question read on next week's podcast, use a comment on YouTube. They say, I've never been a part of a testing team before. What is the best way to start sharing ideas and asking for feedback without feeling like you're stepping on people's toes, especially if you don't have a resume of decent finishes at events? I've always felt like this is a chicken or the egg situation. Collaboration is obviously a great tool to help you get better, but it feels like there's a barrier to entry in joining a team. I also understand that teams as individuals want to protect their knowledge/innovations to preserve their competitive edge. What's the best way to navigate this social dance? Very, very good question, especially once the TCG has matured a little bit like Flesh and Blood has. I think in the earlier days, it would have been a bit easier. But now it's definitely very, very challenging. I mean, it really depends on like what you're targeting for a testing group. There's just one thing I want to say before I pass over to Hayden is that I think that the biggest mistake a lot of immature testing groups make, and also I'll go on a limb to say immature players make, is that they overvalue skill. And when I say skill, I mean in quotation skill, and undervalue attitude and approach. And I think that attitude approach is one of the most important things when it comes to testing effectively for any TCG, and particularly humility. Like when people have egos that are rooted in, an archetype, a play style, even their win rate, like they are so beyond useless to the level of being actually detrimental to the entire group that they're like, you just do not want them. And the problem is that people often, when they look to build a testing group, try to look at the resume first, look at the finishes first, when that is very much farther down the totem pole than attitude, approach, and just ability to learn and be humble.
Brendan speaking from experience there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the number one most important thing is just finding the right attitude to pair with whatever you want to do. Like whether you're testing for a ProQuest, a Nationals, a Road to Nationals, all the way to a Calling and a Pro Tour, I actually don't think it matters. I think just finding the right mixes of personalities and attitudes is actually the most important thing. Like, let's say you are a super competitive Spike and you find some like-minded people. That might be fine, right? But I think what kind of Brendan's saying in that situation, you're going to get these egos and things, and maybe you can manage them, or maybe it works out for the dynamic seems to work out with the smaller group of spiky players that you have, or whatever it is. But I think for the most people, it's going to come down to finding like-minded people, ideally close, if not in the same city or kind of area as you, then probably in the same time zone is going to make it a lot easier. And I think the way to start is just to talk about the game and just to share learnings and findings, whether it's from your armories, whether it's from your Teleshire games, whether it's from your testing sessions together, just start small and build it up. And you don't have to go and find these big super teams or big teams. I mean, for some people, the teams and groups don't even necessarily work. Like I do majority of my testing in a group of 4 people. Like that's what works for me. But I also really enjoy being part of bigger teams from a discussion standpoint. So I think it depends on what's going to work for you. In terms of like collaboration, I think it's like a really important word that kind of Lachlan uses. Also, shout out to Lachlan for sending me this question as well. Who's messaging me about Dash. I think collaboration is whatever you make it out to be, right? And setting some group norms whenever you enter a group or you pull a group of people together is like really important. I think about, okay, what do we want to achieve first of all? And then how are we going to do it? And is it going to be kind of on a casual basis? Is it just going to be messaging about some notes and findings? Or are we actually going to try and really specifically test specific things together as a group? And then the last thing, Brendan, I think you talked about maturity and kind of awareness and things like that. Protecting information, it's just so much less relevant now in flesh and blood. Yeah, it really is. And so I actually think just being open to testing with others and bringing people in and going outside of your group and testing. And there might be certain things where it's like non-negotiables. It's like, okay, if we find something that is completely been missed by other people or is so specific to a really, really tight, narrow meta, then maybe you do want to keep hold of that. But it's going to be a small piece of information. It's not going to be your whole testing process or your whole testing group. So I think be willing to share outside of the groups that maybe you're familiar with and ask people questions, start chatting to them, try and get a game or two in here or there, learn some things. One of my favorite things now is finding people who are just like specialists in things and being like, hey, I would love to jam some games into you and let's learn some things together about this matchup. Yeah.
I mean, I can't stress enough that I believe that the actual resume and the finishes are so much less relevant than the attitude and the approach. But also, like, I think you need to find people who have similar goals than you. I think when you try to get a testing group together or get a group of people together that don't have congruent goals, there's a lot of friction. Because there's this kind of like unwritten social contract that everybody should be contributing equally. But if the goals are vastly different, then you'll see, vastly different levels of contribution that can lead to a lot of tension. And I don't think it's necessarily good tension. So I think it's really important to find people that are, they want the same things. And that doesn't have to be, you don't have to approach it from the beginning. It's like, I want to be world champion. You can be like, I want to test for this calling. I'm going to go find other people that want to test for this calling. But maybe in that case, you don't need to add, Jimmy into your group, who is only focused on going to the armory and just wants to throw back a few beers. It's like it could be a good fit, but sometimes it's not. And if you're 2 weeks, 2 months into the line, you're like, Jimmy, where the fuck are you? It's testing time. And he's like, I have a family. There's going to be tension there. So it's just you might be incongruent. And we've definitely encountered that in the past, and it's to nobody's fault. It's just people had different goals. So honestly, what we've done in the past is we just try to find people that are aligned on the same goal and that also have the correct approach to testing. And sometimes we do make a little bit of allowances. We do let people in with sometimes not the best attitudes. And most of the time it doesn't work, but sometimes you get away with it. I mean, some big red flags for me are like people who get upset, like while testing, about losing. And it's just weird, right? They look at the test, they take the approach of testing as trying to win the game rather than trying to learn things. And it's a bizarre way to go about it, and I find that it's often a huge detriment because the goal of any testing process should be to find the best objective result, not to have a higher or lower win rate than somebody else on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, agree. I don't even bother putting names on spreadsheets anymore for that reason. Look, I've said this for multiple times on the podcast, but I think for me, you talk about results, they kind of mean nothing really. Like I, for a long time, kind of shouted out Dan as like the best testing partner I think anyone could really wish for, because he's always dedicated, he's efficient, he comes in, no real ego related to the testing. He was saying to me, he was like, I've lost like 12 or 15 games in a row in testing. I don't know if you noticed, like just as in the lead up to nationals. And I was like, oh, I actually hadn't, to be honest. He's like, yeah, I'm on a massive losing streak. And then he just goes off and rattles off the national championship. So guy just completely separates it from testing, which is a great attitude to have, I think. I think in the last piece to address Lachlan's question, in terms of like getting this happening or getting this started, I think just start with people that you've kind of met or know or have some acquaintance with. That's the easiest way to start it, I think, is like if you meet someone at a Pro Quest or a Road to Nationals and you think they're a good player or someone around your kind of skill level that you want to practice with, and you kind of feel like it's going to be like Brendan says, congruent. Check the bingo card on that one. Then start with that person. That's as easy as that, really. It doesn't need to be this big kind of thing. It could be 2-3 people, and then you grow from there. It's like, okay, after Pro Quest season, the 3 of us enjoyed doing that. We got some good results. We got some good learnings. Maybe there's a 4th person you bring in or something, and then I don't know. Like, I think groups get bigger and bigger these days, but like I'm saying, you can kind of keep it smaller and then just test outside of that as well. There's so many different ways to cut it.
Yeah, I think the general approach nowadays is like, at least the higher level is at these larger testing groups, which are kind of aggregating information that's coming from multiple different sort of microcosms of that group. Like Hayden mentioned that he's testing with a small group, like that's who he tests with, that's who's on his time zone, those are the people that he enjoys playing with the most frequently. But then he comes together with a larger group, and then they aggregate information and try to find the best objective result coming basically from what you could consider to be multiple different testing teams.
Yeah, that's definitely what we did for LA and for a few events now, actually. Worlds as well, a couple of years ago. So.
Yeah, and I think that that's the best approach right now. I actually don't think it was the best approach at some point in the game, like very early in the game, because you could get a significant edge because the game was just it was a wild west. But nowadays, I think if you're taking that approach, it's mostly hubris, right? You're kind of deluding yourself into thinking that you have some sort of edge that other people don't have. There's just too many people that are too good at the game that are working too hard to be better. That it's just very, very unlikely that you're going to be better off in siloed off rather than you would in a group and sharing information.
Yeah, agree. Cool. Well, if you want to get your questions in for the Command and Cookout, you can do so. Drop it in a YouTube comment below. Let us know it's a Command and Cookout question. You can email arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can, if you're an Arsenal Pass patron, drop it in the Discord server marked Command and Cookout questions. Or you can DM us on Twitter, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, good luck with the DM on Twitter. I think you have to have Twitter Premium nowadays or something to DM people.
What?
Yeah, unless you're like following them. But yeah.
All right, just add us then. Just add us. Follow us and add us. Arsenal Pass.
You have to follow them back. But.
Goodness me.
Or you can just get Twitter Premium. This is actually you can check out our affiliate code in the description, and you
can check out my Elon Musk code.
Yeah.
It's just Musky Boy 123.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, main topic: ban restricted. What happens next? PT Amsterdam coming up. What's going through your mind? I know you're not playing, but let's just hit it. I want to hit it with a high level question first, which is, what do you like? What do you prefer to test for? Would you prefer to have the meta, or at least the game itself, not be changing this close to the Pro Tour, or do you like shakeups like this because it can give you a chance to sort of innovate and find something that maybe other people haven't?
It depends. I think for me personally, it's always going to depend on my availability of time. To be honest. So in the past, when that's happened, sometimes it's been great. I've had the time to be able to test, and other times it's been really tough, and I've not had the time to be able to test and explore. I think in general, whatever is best for the health of the meta is the correct decision. So I think this is the correct decision. This would be my preferred sort of situation. But it does mean there's a lot of testing to be done, because I think so there's a couple of questions basically that come off the back of this. I think the first question is does anything change for Zen, right? That's the first question. So I think you need to play a bunch of games of Zen with probably basically just removing those 3 to 6 cards, potentially 3 Gust Waves, depending on what the build looks like, and replace those with some good power cards and work out, okay, what does this look like with just this kind of like slightly powered down version? Where does Zen sit? And then I think your next question after that becomes, how good is this build of Zen? Where does it sit? And then you start to go, okay, now where does it sit in the best deck in the format kind of tier? How good is it into, its key sort of counterparts like Nu, for instance, like Enigma? How does that match up now play? And then I think you can go down this like divergent path of like, okay, this is what we think the Zen list is going to look like now, and let's start using that as a gauntlet deck to test other things and work out how far maybe Enigma comes up, for instance. Or you go, okay, how do we improve this Zen build and iterate on that? And so there's so many different pathways you can go down, and I think you have to try and do this efficiently and quickly, because otherwise you could get stuck a week before the Pro Tour still not knowing whether Zen's the best deck or not. And I think you need to work that out probably this week. And then next week, you probably need to work out what does other builds of Zen look like. And then that third week should be, okay, now we have a good lay of the metagame and what we think people are going to play. What is actually the correct deck to play? And I think it's going to be really tough for teams. I think they're not going to necessarily know what to do, where to get to, how to get to it. And I think for that reason, we're going to see a lot of people play Zen. We're going to see a lot of people think that the status quo is the same and play Nu and these sorts of decks. And then we're going to see people who have maybe figured out a deeper level and play maybe more interesting picks or more developed lists of Zen, for instance. And they may or may not get punished by other people finding or not finding things. I don't know.
That's what's interesting. You talk about going at a deeper level and sort of having the advantage, but Flesh and Blood is in large part a metagame type of game. Like, it's very, very impactful. So if the aggregate is like significantly lagging behind and being able to adapt to what are the new best decks or like what the meta should be, right? It's like you have to take that into consideration with what you bring. It's like, are people just going to end up in this kind of like the same old Zen list? Because like maybe you realize like Zen is not that good. There's another deck in the format that's significantly risen up, but it still doesn't have a great matchup into Zen. But if players were smart about it, they would not bring Zen, right? Zen should drop in terms of metagame share. But because of like how soon the tournament is coming, people aren't able to adapt. So your sort of next level pick is not appropriate.
Yeah, let's use an example. So let's say that a bunch of groups do a bunch of testing, and it's like, okay, well, let's say one or two particular groups, like, okay, Zen, we tried all these different iterations of Zen, we tried these builds of Zen. It is now 2 weeks into Nu, it is 2 weeks into Azalea, and these are two really strong decks. Nu's the second winningest hero, I think, of the national season, and was second most represented at a lot of nationals as well, including my own. Okay, so in that case, we're actually going to walk away from Zen, and we think a lot of people are going to walk away from Zen. Enigma becomes a lot more enticing. It still has a potentially, and this is all hypothetical, let's say it still has a tough matchup into Zen, but it is better than it was, and we think the meta is going to shift so much that people are going to walk away from Zen. Now we have this great matchup into Nu, and my goodness, Nu and Azalea and whatever else, let's say. But they get there on the day, and not everyone's figured that out, and there's still a bunch of people playing Zen or iterations of Zen, and they get completely punished for working at level 3 when people are, or trying to respond to level 2 when people are operating at level 1, for instance. And that's, that is a real thing that we've seen happen in the past, and there's a real thing that could happen again, especially when the meta changes or there's impacts to a meta so close to an event.
So you said you didn't know the answer to this question, but I want to ask you anyway. I want to force you to give me an answer, and if it's incorrect. Do you think that Zen is still the best deck in the format?
I honestly don't know.
Just go out on a limb. Just give me a buy-in. I need a yes or no.
I think it probably is because the consistency is so good. Traverse is so good. And if I think about games where Zen doesn't pop off with big bonds turns, so big 38 to 50 damage turns, it's still very, very scary and very, very powerful, and probably still the best aggro deck in the format, although we'll talk about that as I have got a list of maybe some of the winners, losers, etc. You still have Art of War, you still have Harmonies, you still have these big turns, I think. And let's just put on top of that, let's say Zen just becomes the same Zen list, but minus 3 to 6 bonds, right? Mm-hmm. I still think it's probably the best deck in the format. And if people can iterate and find ways to even increase the power level, not from where it was, obviously, but from this kind of ban, then I think it definitely is best deck in format. And I think the big reason for that, honestly, is because the closest contenders in terms of decks that have been performing are actually just not that good. Like, I don't think Nu is very good.
Yeah, I see that a lot. I see a lot of people kind of, well, I don't know if they're swearing by Nu, but definitely a lot of Nu zealots. And then I see a lot of people saying that the deck is just like not great.
Do you know what I think Nu is? Nu is just Dorinthia.
Okay.
People don't know how to play against it. People don't know how to sideboard into it. People don't understand the configuration of these new decks that people have been playing, and they get severely punished for it. Like, I actually think the pre-ban Zen matchup was slightly favored to Nu at best, honestly. And I, get it. You can put results in front of me in terms of Nu's have been winning events, including friend of the show, Yuhasan Alampe won his nationals with Nu, for instance. But I've seen the games. I've played the games on both sides. Like, I think when you understand the matchup really well, it's at best 50-50 for Nu, honestly. And I think there's a lot of people who would agree with that sentiment, who have played that matchup at a high level.
What does this mean for Dash? I mean, that's a hero that you performed well with, Dan performed well with. I mean, where is Dash landing in the metagame after this?
So I think Dash was the most consistent aggro deck in the format. And what I mean by that is, so Zen had these big turns, had the better damage for sure, had the over probably 4 turns, or over 5 turns, Zen probably had the better total damage a lot of the time, but Dash could always do it consistently, I think. And I think that's kind of what Dash's role in the meta was. So I think it gets better for Dash because the ceiling kind of gets cut a little bit on Zen. So I think that helps the aggregate damage. I think Dash is potentially in a good place. I think one thing that hurts Dash is the more it's known about and the more you know the game plans of it, the little bit easier it is to combat, I think. But it kind of is what it is. It's this kind of consistent aggro deck where it says the meta then becomes what is around it. What are the other decks?
Yeah. Okay. Well, what does this mean? I mean, you said you want to talk about other aggro decks, but what about Katsu in particular? Like, where does Katsu?
Oh yeah, RIP Katsu. Katsu got it. If you want to talk about the biggest loser of this banned and restricted, it's definitely Katsu. Katsu got absolutely decimated.
Yeah, why do you think they didn't specify this? Is it just too kind of clunky to specify towards Zen specifically? Like,
yeah, I think so.
Okay, because they've done this in the past.
Been really
as well.
clear. Yeah, they've been really clear that they won't ban cards for a hero. They'll ban cards. So, yeah, I mean that's rough for Katsu. They do mention it in the ban restricted announcement. Brian talks about it. Brendan as kind of something that is a byproduct of it, but they're going to look to address for Katsu potentially in an expansion slot coming up. But it's so funny that Zen gets Katsu gets all these new cards over the last few sets. We see people showing up to PC Baltimore, notably the Polish team with Katsu, for instance, this Bonds Katsu list, and still isn't honestly good enough. And then Katsu's fighting for his life out there, and then all of a sudden Zen comes in, just appropriates the cards, makes this broken deck, and then LSS go, sorry, we've got to ban Bonds, and then Katsu's just left there going, what the hell, man? What the hell?
Yeah.
But yeah, Katsu definitely the biggest loser, more so than Zen.
All right, well, who are the biggest winners off the back of this banner restricted?
I think it's got to be Enigma, right? I think Enigma's got to be top of the list because Enigma's worst matchup had to be Zen, and if Zen is getting any kind of, even if this is a minor nerf to Zen just to balance it out, it's going to mean less Zen being played because people are going to see opportunities, they're going to go to other decks, etc. I think Enigma has to be the biggest winner because Enigma has some great matchups elsewhere in the meta. I think Prism has also got to be a win. I think Prism is something that I was really keen on trying to make work for Nationals, but the Zen matchup just wasn't consistent enough. You just couldn't do anything about these big turns. Things didn't line up. But now with less density of bonds, which is the scariest turns, honestly, and especially as a deck like Prism, I think that opens things up for Prism. Like if you're just playing into an aggro deck that just has damage, then it's a lot less scary, I think. So, and then the other would be KO, because I think the KO Zen matchup was definitely Zen favored, but KO is still a really good hero. And if you take away the explosiveness, because KO wants to play a slightly longer game often, sort of like 7 to 8 turns, then I think KO also gets a pretty big win out of this. I think their matchup becomes a lot closer and potentially probably not KO favored, but puts KO into a position where it might be back on the table again.
How's the KO new matchup?
I think it's pretty good for KO. That's what Yuha was kind of telling me, or saying to the group, is that it's pretty good for KO. I think KO has a lot of 45-55 matchups. It did in the last meta as well, right? It's just that it was on the right side of the 50 into things, into a lot of things actually, and just became kind of the default best deck in the format. Whereas now maybe it's more on the 45 side of things. But you flip a couple of these, the meta changes slightly. KO could be in a really good spot again. So
okay. Well, any sort of like other winners you want to talk about, like kind of secondary, tertiary winners from this?
Yeah, I think News could be in that kind of next lot of winners, because I talked about, that new matchup being at best kind of 50-50 for New. And obviously it's done a lot of work in the past couple of weeks, winning multiple nationals. I think 5 nationals over this past weekend, tied with Zen for the number 1 spot on the last week of nationals in terms of wins. I think it was 5 apiece. But I think if that matchup just gets slightly better, like those kind of big blowout turns, because I used that anecdote before, if I'm playing Azalea and I miss my 1 turn of disruption and Zen just drops 51 damage on me, it was honestly kind of the same for New. It's like, okay, you miss a turn here, or you draw a 4 blue attack hand or an all attack reaction hand, and then your opponent all of a sudden gets to just do their thing because their hand lined up. Oh, they drew Harmony and Out of War at the turn where you drew nothing, for instance. then in that case, I think Zen was going to win those matchups. So if you have less of those turns, then I think naturally it's going to help Nu. So I think Nu has to be a winner in some way, shape, or form, even if that matchup was perceived by people to already be good. We talked about Dash already. I think Riptide. I think same thing. If Zen's kind of ceiling is a little bit muted, then the Riptide aspect is even more interesting because I think Riptide has some really good game plans into what Zen wants to do. So I think Riptide's kind of one of there. And then Azalea, same sort of thing. Basically all these decks that have some disruption, have some interaction, they also, maybe not as much as the non-interactive decks, actually get a pretty decent win out of this, I think.
Cool. Do you want to expand a little bit on metagame, like high-level metagame changes that you expect to come from this? And we've talked about it already, of course, but maybe you could get, actually, instead of high-level, maybe get in the nitty-gritty of kind of like where do we
actually go?
Yeah, like well, let's not even go like where we would go. Like where would you be going if you were playing Amsterdam?
I don't think there's much of a chance I was playing Zen anyway. I think because of the way Zen is in terms of this, it's this really explosive kind of piece that has some consistency issues. I think there's always a way that you can potentially play a deck that can find an angle into Zen. And also at the same time, I wouldn't want to be playing Zen Mirrors, and I wouldn't want to be playing a deck that potentially just doesn't do the thing and kind of feels bad. So, and also, I don't love playing the best deck in the format. So it might have been the right decision to play Zen had nothing changed, but I probably wouldn't have anyway. But even more so, what I'd be looking at now is the decks that can take advantage of potentially having an extra turn. What does an extra turn mean for you? Now that Zen is, you can get to potentially 7 turns against Zen more consistently, or 8 turns. And I think for me, that means looking at the Illusionists. I think that's big wins for Enigma and Prism. So I expect that because the first thing I would do is what happens to the meta. So I'd try and answer all those questions that we talked about. Where does Zen sit now, etc. If I got to the conclusion that, Zen's still pretty good, but it's not quite as good, I'm expecting that the meta share comes down to maybe closer to 20%, 15 to 22% of the meta for Pro Tour. I think it'll be below Lexi, let's say, from Baltimore. So let's say around 18 to 20%. What opens up things then? Then I think Nu will be well represented, and I think some people will pick up on the Illusionists because people are good at this game. They understand how to build decks, and they find all these things. So all of a sudden, I'm starting to look at a meta that looks like Zen, Nu, and some Illusionists. Then where do I go from there? What do I want to play into that kind of meta? Honestly, I probably want to play Dash into that meta. So I might double down and play some more Dash, and I expect Dash will have a decent representation. But those Illusionists would probably be the things that I would look at as well. What does an Enigma deck look like into this meta? What is Prism? Prism is pretty exciting to me in this meta. And then after that, I'd probably look at these aggressive mid-range decks that can take advantage of the extra turn as well by potentially being able to combat it. So I'd start to look at things like KO and maybe even Riptide. Mm-hmm. I think Azalea's always got to be in there because it is really powerful. But I just wonder if Riptide might become the better Ranger option, honestly.
Okay, one selfish question before we go. Where do you think Kano lands?
I think this is negative for Kano overall. Probably. That's a good question, actually. I didn't talk about Kano before. I think this is probably because I think the Kano always is going to perform better into a clearer metagame, I think, because you just know what to target, you know the game plans that you need to enact. I think Kano in general is going to be better into a clearer metagame. I think Zen was probably an even matchup for you, so you potentially lose some meta share there, and especially if the Illusionist gain, those are bad matchups for you, particularly Prism. So I don't think it can be good for Kano, but one thing I will say is that Kindle is a hell of a card. Kindle reminds me so much of
Tome.
Flame. Yeah. So I think Kano is going to show up, and I think it's so weird. Like in the past, it's like, oh, make sure you're prepared for Kano because Kano is looking good in this metagame right now. I don't even know what being prepared for Kano looks like now because the deck feels kind of high rolly, honestly, on its best turns. So they did the thing. They increased the variance and increased the power level. But I think if I'm going to be set up for Kano at the moment, Spell Freight is probably what I'm playing. Spell Void is good.
How do you feel about them doing the thing? Because obviously they did it for Jermai. You're like, okay, yeah, makes sense. But now it seems to be like a consistent aspect of game design that they're injecting into multiple different heroes. How do you feel about that? Because I mean, you're a notorious Tome of Imperial Flame hater. I'm assuming Kindle is not high on your list of enjoyability. Like, how do you feel about the change in design with some of these expansion slot cards?
So they kind of did to Victor as well. Like Visit the Goldman Estate is kind of similar. Honestly.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that card's fucked. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's like, okay, if you win your first clash, then your first Goldman Estate, like let's say you win your first test of strength, for instance, right? Then that first Goldman Estate is always going to draw you a card because you start with a shield, right? But if you don't win your first clash, then the first Goldman Estate sucks. So it's such this kind of high-low card, which is, same as Kindle. Oh my gosh, I have Kindle in my hand and these 4 blues, or I have it, I have it with a tome, etc. Versus I flip a Kindle off my blind Kano.
Yeah.
Those are 2 very different things. Same with Tome and Droma, right? Like, oh, I have, this Tome in Arsenal and I play it and all of a sudden I get to drop 3 dragons versus I play this Tome and I draw another Tome plus a bunch of 0 costs. It's very different. So, I hate it. Honestly, I don't love it. I get it. I know that this is something that Brian, we're privileged. Brian came onto the pod and talked to us about this and specifically kind of outlined some of these things that would happen, and we've seen it. I think when it's one-off cards as opposed to big changes, wholesale changes in archetype, it just feels a little bit cheap. I don't know. It feels a little cheap. It feels a little bit easy, and I don't love it, honestly. So I hope they're really careful with how they use these kind of cards. The Victor one feels less egregious to me, though.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know why.
I'll give some devil's advocate. I know I was the one to chime in and say cheap. I just think it was the appropriate word. But I didn't hate Tome of Imperial Flame. I don't hate Visit the Goldman Estate. Kindle. It's like,
see, when it comes to your hero, dude.
Yeah,
see?
I mean, you're talking about like we have to put a whiff in the deck. Like that sucks. Like that really sucks.
Yeah. But that's what Tome was in Tromite. It changed the reliability, but you had to play the card because it was so strong and you couldn't win a mirror without it.
Yeah, it makes me feel like I have to put myself in scenarios sometimes where I like have to kind of gamble on like whether I insta lose or not. Like maybe Dromite was the same. I felt like it wasn't that bad. Also, I haven't played too much with Kano, so maybe like there's play patterns to sort of mitigates that risk. And I don't know if people are still pitch stacking,
for sure,
but. Or like turbo pitch stacking, but yeah, it's
dude, I hate pitch stacking.
Me too.
I mean, I love it, but I hate it.
It's it's cumbersome, but I also think that for a non-zero amount of time, it was either equal or not as good as just playing like normal games of Kano. And I don't mean playing off the top of that, but playing this sort of mid-range kind of combo deck. It could have outpaced that and been a better strategy at some point, but not when I was playing the deck in a serious manner, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts?
I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Type A. Read and talk.
Type A. Apparently it's way worse than Type B. I had Type B the other week.
There you go.
So.
Strikes again.
Anyway.
My last, I think, thoughts, I was having a little bit of a ponder. What would it take for Zen to drop off? And I think it would take this change to be so impactful that Enigma and Prism can consistently beat Zen now. And I don't think that's going to happen. So I think the most likely outcome of this change is that Zen gets a bit of a nerf. We still see Zen be one of, if not the best deck in the format, and come Pro Tour time. Zen probably the most played, but it's going to be a lot closer, and people are going to take some risks. People are going to take some gambles on, some flyers and some heroes that need to dodge matchups. And I think Pro Tour Amsterdam is potentially going to be very, very interesting to watch. So I'm excited for it.
All right. Well, if you enjoy this podcast, then one thing you can do is leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Twitter's Brendan APG, Fian_Dale. Be sure to check out the Dash deck if you're interested in that deck for the upcoming Pro Tour. And big thank you to Dan for hopping on. And yeah, thank you all so much for listening. Let us know what you think of Zen in this new metagame. Is it still the best deck? And we'll see you next week.